And when you retired, did you go to work anywhere else? Before?
No, sir.
Okay. And who was it that advised you that there was a position available in the Office of Off-Duty Employment?
Director Shea.
And he's the police director in Jersey City,
Yes.
correct? And you knew him prior to applying for this position, correct?
I met him once, yes, prior.
And ultimately, he became your direct supervisor at the Office of Off-Duty Employment, correct?
Yes.
When you worked for the corrections department, were you involved with inputting payroll, dealing with off-duty vouchers or anything like that?
No.
Do you have any experience at all with the types of things that you were doing when you took over as the intake coordinator?
No.
So would it be fair to say that you didn't know anything about how Jersey City handled off-duty details, whether it be the Skyway detail or any other detail that they've handled in the past for private vendors prior to you coming on board?
Correct.
Now, when you came on board, when was that?
Middle of April 2014.
What was your job title? Intake coordinator?
Yes, sir.
So you didn't get any training from anyone when you started at the Office of Off-Duty Employment. And when you got there, the Skyway project was up and running already, correct?
Yes.
And you knew just from what you had heard in the news and what you saw driving into work that it was extremely chaotic, correct?
Yes.
And these vouchers were coming to you by the bundle, weren't they?
Yes.
And you had to sort them out between which ones were Skyway, which ones were 139, which ones were the private vendors, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that was some undertaking, correct?
Yes.
Pretty hectic in that office, right?
Yep.
You said that with a little smile there. I'm probably underestimating how hectic it was in there, right?
Yes, it's very busy up there.
Okay. Now, when you started and you had your discussions with Timmons, by the way, let me back up. Did you have any discussions with Director Shea about what your job responsibility was going to be?
No.
Okay. Did anyone talk to you and say that they were aware of what the requirements were with regard to verification of these vouchers?
No.
Now, you recall the grand jury you testified about, you were asked some questions about an MOU or a Memorandum of Understanding, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you testified, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that prior to your starting at the Office of Off-Duty Employment, you had never seen that document.
Correct.
Until Mr. Stoma showed it to you in the grand jury on May 10th of 2016, you had never seen that document, correct?
Correct.
Had anyone ever explained to you the contents of the MOU in terms of what the obligations of Jersey City were versus what the obligations of the Department of Transportation were?
No.
So you had no idea whatsoever how many people were supposed to be paid by the Department of Personnel as far as police officers are concerned?
Correct.
And that was right up until Mr. Stoma showed you that document in the grand jury in 2016, right?
Yes.
Now, you testified on several occasions here in this courtroom that what your understanding was as to what the obligations of the police officers were that worked the posts, as well as what the obligations of the supervisors when they checked the post. Do you recall testifying about that?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever go out on any given day and follow a supervisor around or check a post yourself?
No.
Did you ever see anything in writing, whether it be in general order, a memo, something from Director Shea or anybody else that's in the brass of the Jersey City Police Department that explained to you what the procedures were that the officers and supervisors would have to follow in order to get paid by the Department of Transportation via the Jersey City Police Department?
No.
I'm going to assume, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that what you learned about what you testified to yesterday, someone told you.
Yes.
And I would assume that the person that told you that was Mark Timmons?
Correct.
Okay. So everything you testified to yesterday about obligations of officers and supervisors and documents and how they were supposed to be filled out and all of that information all came from another source, not from your own direct knowledge.
Correct.
And you never saw one piece of writing that said that when when a supervisor signs a voucher, he's attesting that he saw the individual on that particular post.
Correct.
Okay. So that was an assumption you made.
Page
Correct?
50, line 8. All right. So just describe for the members of the grand jury your verification process with respect to the vouchers that you received. And the answer was, many vouchers come in and the question was, yeah, we'll put that back up here. Answer, many vouchers come in with either no signature because the supervisor wasn't available or the foreman. And I would check the daily roster and the supervisor's sign-in sheet to verify that the officer worked. Then I would send the voucher back to the supervisor to get it signed.
Yes.
And we would do that daily just to check to verify to make sure everything was working. If the paperwork is correct, if this paperwork is correct, and all the areas are covered. Remember testifying to that?
Yes.
All right, so there were times that vouchers came in unsigned, and you sent them back to the supervisors to get them signed, correct?
Yes.
Because you weren't going to pay them unless they were signed.
Yes.
So tell me that process. What'd you do? You called Goldrich or you called the supervisor directly?
Either or.
Okay. Then you would physically hand the voucher to either Goldrich or the individual supervisor, is that correct?
We would send it back by inter-office mail, yes.
All right, so it would go back to the district?
Yes.
And sometimes, I would have to assume that this was clearly after the detail was worked, right?
Yes.
Because you get the voucher sometimes a day later, sometimes 2 weeks later, correct?
Yes.
So hypothetically, you could have gotten a voucher for June 2nd on June 14th, right?
Oh, yes.
And it's unsigned.
Yes.
And then the supervisor gets it in inter-office mail, and you're assuming he signs it, correct? Do you know if he called the individual officer to say, hey, Joe, did you work that day?
I don't know.
Okay. But all you needed was it to come back to you in a signed form, correct?
Yes.
But when you got those back, would you agree with me that the process that you testified to yesterday on direct, and here again today, where the officer was supposed to be out on the post, seeing the person at the post, and signing it while they were standing at their post, wasn't followed?
Yes.
Okay. So in that situation where the supervisor signs at a later date, sometimes 2 weeks later, is it fair to assume that that supervisor either just relied on the fact that the officer worked because they submitted a voucher, or maybe called the officer and asked them if they worked?
That's possible, yes.
So they trusted that individual, you would have to assume, right?
Yes.
Did you ever report any of that information? Strike it. Do you recall? Strike that. My client is charged with 3 dates with regard to Joseph Wadeko, the name that you mentioned before. Joseph Wadeko was the post officer. My client, Kelly Chester, signed for him on 3 dates. Now, I'll make the representation to you that Joseph Wadeko was not listed on the patrol log for that particular date. Now, do you have any independent recollection, if any of the vouchers that you sent back as being unsigned related to Joseph Wadeko?
I don't recall.
If it had related to Joseph Wadeko, you would be looking at his voucher, it wouldn't have a supervisor's signature on it, and you would send it either back to Joseph Wadeko or back to the supervisor, that was the subject, to get signed, correct?
Yes.
So theoretically, Joseph Wadeko, if it came back to him, let's say Goldrich handed it to him, he could walk to a supervisor, who is a supervisor, and have them sign it, correct?
No, it would have to be the supervisor assigned to that detail that day.
Okay. All right. So then, any time that you sent the voucher back, was it always signed by the supervisor that was assigned to the detail that day?
No. Because if the supervisor wasn't available, they would have the desk sergeant or the desk supervisor in the district they work sign off on it.
Okay. So now, we've got a situation where a person who's not even assigned to DOT on that particular day, signing sometimes 2 weeks later for an individual who's supposed to be at a post. Is that correct?
Yes,
So it could be a desk boss, it could be maybe the Skyway commander,
yes,
okay? Maybe the second in charge of the Skyway command
yes.
that could sign, correct? And all they're doing, under that scenario where you send it back, all they're doing is signing off someone's voucher for an individual that didn't get it signed, correct? Under that scenario.
Yes,
And if it came back to you, you paid it.
yes.
Now, in going through these thousands of documents, I would not be able to figure out which ones you sent back to get signed, correct?
Correct.
Because they're signed,
Yes,
and you paid them.
yes.
Do you have any recollection, independent recollection at all, of any officers that you had sent back to be signed?
No.
All right. Can you mark it? These are all vouchers from April 10th to April 17th, 2014. April 10th to April 17th, 2014. I can make a copy. I'm assuming Lucy will make a copy if you want. All right? What is it? They're all the vouchers for the Skyway detail from April 10th. And the last one is April 17th. Mr. Mahoney, I'm going to show you what's been marked D9 for identification. And I'm going to make the representation to you that these are vouchers from April 10th of 2014 for the Skyway detail. And you can look through them if you'd like. For a 1 week time period from April 10th to April 17th of 2014. And I ask you just to take a look at them and just make sure that I'm correct in saying that none of them are signed by a supervisor. All right, I have a very simple question. When you started, was the procedure that a voucher had to be signed, was it already in place?
No, I don't recall.
All right. I'll further make the representation to you, and I have all of the payroll records, that every single one of the vouchers that's listed in there was paid. Do you know, was there something that happened on April 17th where the process changed, where you needed now to get a signature on the vouchers?
No,
You may not have actually been working at that time, though, right?
I wasn't employed yet.
You weren't even employed. All right. But did you hear anything later when you came on April 24th or so, around there?
No.
That this procedure wasn't the procedure in the beginning, but we've changed it now and the vouchers need to be signed?
No,
Okay. All right. So you have no knowledge of why the vouchers from August 10th to August 17th have no supervisor signature? All right. Fair enough. All right. I'm going to show you what's been marked D10 for identification and make the representation to you, and I'd like you to go through it, that these are off-duty vouchers for the Pulaski Skyway detail for police officers, so you know which vouchers we're talking about, right? Starting, the first one's April 15th of 2014, and it goes through September 23rd of 2014. See the last one?
yes.
I just wanted you to take a look at them. And specifically, first I want you to just go through them and indicate to me whether your office approved them for payment. And I have the payroll records available if you want to see.
I would say yes.
Okay. And would you agree with me in looking at those that none of them are signed?
Yes.
Okay. And you just earlier testified that you wouldn't push through any voucher that wasn't signed.
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain to me how to get paid?
No, I cannot.
Now, the ones I tabbed, see the ones that are tabbed in purple?
Yes.
I ask you to take a look at the first one. July 30th, 2014. Okay. We'll take a look at this one first. Everyone's on it. Pete, do you have July? It's July 30th. Oh, I didn't tab yours. Okay. It's about halfway through. Yeah. Okay. Now, this one for July 30th of 2014 has a foreman authorized agent printed at the top. See that?
Yes.
But it doesn't have a signature below it. You required both, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you know, sometimes did the officer just print in a supervisor's name?
I don't know.
Okay. And this one is for a Leon Tucker Jr., and it's stamped with Veritas Equitas, and it has Tucker in the middle. Do you know what Veritas Equitas is?
No.
Okay. You don't know what that means?
Nope.
All right. If I told you it means truth and justice, that's not a verification that was required on these vouchers, correct?
No. Any voucher he ever turned in, he stamped with his name on it.
Right, because he's a proud member of the Navy, correct?
Yes.
All right. So this is the closest thing we can see to a certification from Officer Tucker, right?
Yes.
Okay. Take a look at these other ones. Now, the next one is Cornelius Donovan, July 30th of 2014. Captain Ascalise' name is printed there, correct?
Yes.
Do you know why Cornelius Donovan would have printed Captain Ascalise's name there on that one without a signature?
No, I do not.
But it got paid, right?
Yes.
And that got paid because you know that Captain Ascalise was the Skyway commander, right?
Yes.
And he was authorized to sign them. Even in this situation, he even signed it. Someone just printed his name, right?
Yes.
So that one kind of slipped through the cracks, right? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next one that we have tabbed here is Police Officer Drua. Again, foreman authorized agent. It's printed in Captain Ascalise, correct?
Yes.
You know who put that in?
No, I don't.
There's no signature associated with it, correct?
Correct.
So we don't know if Captain Ascalise even authorized that, but we know someone put his name down so the person could get paid.
Yes.
And you paid. All right, let's just do just a couple more here. The one that's listed for 8/11 of 2014, Eric Infantes is the officer. The location is Center and Bright, and printed there in small letters appears to be Lieutenant Flora. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. No signature though, correct?
Correct.
You know why that one was paid?
No.
And on August 15th of 2014, Gisela Sanchez, printed name of Lieutenant Scarpa, no signature, correct?
Correct.
That appears to have been paid based upon the information filled out by the Office of Off-Duty Coordinator, correct?
Yes.
Now, take a look at this one. This is August 15th of 2014, Police Officer Noel Santiago Jr. This one doesn't have a printed name, nor did it have a signature, but it was paid, correct?
Yes.
And it actually says on the bottom, no detail supervisor available to sign sheet.
Yes.
And the next 3 or 4 have the exact same notation on there. No detail supervisor available to sign sheet. So is it fair to say that sometimes you didn't even need a supervisor's signature as long as they wrote that on there, correct?
Yes,
How do we know that those 4 officers worked?
we don't. We're just going by trust of the voucher being submitted.
But we're not even verifying it by signature on this one, correct? Did you ever, in your recollection, ever call anyone and say, why wasn't a supervisor available to sign these gentlemen and females' sheets?
No.
That one we just looked at there with August 19th, that's Sergeant Brown. Again, that has an X next to Sergeant Brown on the printed line, but there's an X next to signatures, there's no signature there, correct?
Correct.
So that didn't comply with your verification process, correct? Right?
Yes.
Okay. Sean Connors, on September 4th of 2014, has a printed name of Sergeant Robitel. Do you know how Sergeant Robitel even prints how he spells his name?
No,
Okay. Do you know if that's correctly spelled?
I don't think so.
Okay. So somebody wrote, clearly someone wrote,
His name.
printed his name in there.
Yes.
All right, and that was accepted, correct? All right. You get my point on this one, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So the signatures were required, but if the signatures weren't there, they sometimes do that. Show you
Yes.
14 identification. This is from September 16th of 2014. This is Police Officer Kevin Toohey. He worked the 3 to 7 shift, and
Yes.
his post is listed as Communipoint 440, correct?
Yes.
Nobody signed authorizing that they saw him standing on his post, is that correct?
Yes.
So let's see, Communipoint 440. Okay, and I'll show you on the second page, which is the patrol log for Sergeant Furch, who we may hear from in this case. On line 6 at 440, what's he list as Communipoint 440?
States on line 6, uniform 440, DOT detail, uncovered.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you to take a look at the payment spreadsheet. Officer Toohey. Yep. See that? Take a look at that one. I'll make the representation that that is a page taken from D5, and I'll show you D5 in a second. Okay? What's it list for Officer Toohey for the day that his voucher was unsigned and its post is listed as uncovered?
It states here, it was, the data entry was put in twice for the same time frame, which would be 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. on September 16th.
All right, and that data entry that was put in twice, so that would indicate that Officer Toohey, who didn't have a signed voucher, actually got paid twice for that same detail.
Yes.
And you had all of the staff members looking at that payroll document, looking for double entries, correct?
Yes.
And the DOT as well?
Yes.
And did you ever hear back from the DOT and say we found a problem here?
Yes, they have notified us of corrections, yes.
Okay, when?
When? About a month later, after the fact, maybe.
With regard to that entry?
I don't know about that, I don't call this.
Okay. Do you have any documentation to reflect what was sent back from the Department of Transportation indicating that they picked up some errors and there were corrected entries?
Yes.
Who has that documentation?
They're in the office off-duty on file.
Okay. Have you ever had any discussions with the prosecutor in this case about documentation that you have in the Office of Off-Duty Personnel with regard to corrections or errors that were picked up by the Department of Transportation?
I don't recall.
Okay. Would you be able to produce those documents to the state and to the court?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And to the best of your recollection, what do those documents entail?
It just states officers that were double booked in the billing process, and it would correct the invoice that was sent down to Trenton.
Okay. And then when the invoice was corrected that was sent down to Trenton, the DOT would pay would get a credit for the double entry, correct?
Yes,
What would happen with the officer?
the officer would have to pay back the time that he was paid.
Do you have any records reflecting officers paying back time that was paid?
Yes, I think we do.
All right, I would ask you, Judge, I would ask the court to instruct this witness if you would provide the documentation. I know he wasn't present, we were discussing it the other day, but apparently there is documentation relating to the DOT. I would ask that those documents be produced so we can see if it contains any information relevant to this particular case.
Any objection?
Judge, my objection remains, as I indicated previous to this. It's not exculpatory with respect to this particular information, with respect to the allegations in this indictment. It's not exculpatory with respect to what was returned from the DOT. That being said, I have no objection to the documents being produced. I have no objection to that. But again, I maintain, Judge, that information that is testified here with respect to what Mr. Mahoney is being asked as to whether it exists has nothing to do with the dates in this indictment. This does not allege that these officers submitted double payment for particular days that were worked. It alleges, Judge, that the individuals who affixed their signatures to the pay vouchers in this particular case had knowledge that those pay vouchers were false. They relate to Eddie, they relate to Rodeko, and they relate to O'Neill. And the supervisors that affixed their signature to those particular vouchers on this particular date knew that they were false, and they submitted them. That's what this indictment is. I have no objection to the documents being produced, but I maintain, Judge, it is not exculpatory with respect to whether they did what it's alleged to do in this particular indictment.
Your Honor, it's approaching 12:30. If this is a good time to release the witness for lunch, and I'd like to be heard.
Yes, this is a good time to release the witness for lunch. How long, before you go, how long would it take you to produce these documents?
A while, I have to research them.
Well, I'm going to be on this trial for a while, so.
Excuse me for laughing.
No, it's okay. It's long here. I am going to order you to produce those documents. It's not being objected to. It's a whole other issue whether they are exculpatory or not. We're going to that right now. I want to see these DOT, what they sent back to you as to corrections that need to be made or credits that were done, as well as based upon your testimony as to the officers had to pay back, what officers paid back to Jersey City with regards to being double paid, as an example of D14. Okay, you can get those?
Yes.